In a prior video, we talked about how to construct a budget. And to really analyze a budget, you really need to track budget versus actuals. So this is looking at actual performance versus what you budgeted, and then making decisions based on what that analysis tells you. In this video, we're going to look at how to construct a budget versus actuals template, and then how to make decisions based on what the data is telling you. I hope you find the video helpful. If you like the video, please subscribe to our channel for more great content on entrepreneurship, business, and finance. Great, so let's get started. So this is a typical format for a budget versus actuals spreadsheet. So what you can see here is the first column is kind of the actuals. These same rows that we had in our budget are the same rows we have here. So, we'll go through it real quick here. Revenue less your cost of goods sold equals your gross profit, less those major expense items equals your profit before tax. And so what we've done here is we've set up a column. This is for the period of January to March 2023, most people's first quarters. And we set up a few columns here. So what the actuals are, so that's the actual numbers as they were reported, what your budget was, how much you're over budget or under budget, and what percent of budget you are. So let's just walk through some examples line by line, and you can see what's going on. And then some of the conclusions that I might draw from this kind of information as we've got it, and what decisions you can make from that as well. So on the revenue side, your budget for the 3 months was $66,000. And actually you brought in $70,000 of revenue. And for this example, again, let's use the pizza store as an easy to understand business. So what does that mean? Well, you brought in 70,000 of revenue versus a budget of 66,000. So that's 4,000 over budget, or 106% of budget. So that's good. Then let's go down to the cost of goods sold. And just a reminder from the other videos, cost of goods sold is basically the ingredients that goes into those pizzas. So the budget for cost of goods sold was 33,000, which is 50% of the revenue. Here, you can actually see that cost of goods sold was higher than that. It was 41,000, but obviously there were higher revenues as well. So what I like to do here is kind of understand, well, what's the percentage? So let's just do a really quick percentage here. The budgeted percentage was 50%. So we just divide the cost of goods sold by the revenue. The actual percentage, so cost of goods sold as a percent of revenue, was 59%. So our costs per pizza have basically gone up, and quite significantly, And so that, if I'm running this type of business, I'm looking at that. I'm looking at cost of goods sold as a percentage of revenue, and what's it doing versus budget, and why. Now, this could be ingredients cost more this month, or flour, the price of flour went up. And as such, you've got to kind of adjust for that going forward. Like, does this make you change your prices if you're making a lot less money per pizza than you thought you were going to make? But that's the sort of questions I think you need to ask yourself is like, okay, are we over or under budget on this particular line item? Why are we over or under budget on this particular line item? And what are we going to do about it, if anything? And maybe you can't put your prices up and you just have to accept the lower gross profit than you expected. Or maybe you can, and you should adjust the prices accordingly just to get back to the typical gross margin that you were expecting of 50%. So what does that do to actual gross profit? Well, gross profit is revenue minus cost of goods sold. So that is 29,000. So even though you did more revenue than you budgeted, because of those cost overages, you did less gross profit than you budgeted on more revenue. So that's obviously a concern and something to really keep an eye on and to make a decision on. Let's go through some of the other items. So, wages here came in at 13,500 versus a budget of 12,000. And that might be because you had to pay some overtime, or you had some people on sick leave and you had to bring in some temporary staff to cover some of that stuff. So the question again becomes, is this a one-off thing? Is it just for that particular quarter, or is this something that's going to be persistent going into the future? If it's persistent, again, you need to start asking other questions like, well, if I've got extra cost here, how do I make up for that somewhere else? Either by saving money on one of the other expense lines or by charging more per pizza. Okay, and now on to rent. So rent, obviously, something that should be in line with what you budgeted, because rent is normally based on a contract that you have with your landlord. So that hasn't changed, so obviously not a concern. Marketing, we only spent $200 on marketing versus a budget of $750. So that's obviously good, especially as the fact that we brought in more revenue than expected or originally budgeted. So I'm not too concerned by that. It might be an area to save money going forward. You're doing more revenue than expected, but you're spending less on marketing. That's obviously a good thing. So maybe this is an area where you can save money. Same with travel. Travel was only $300 versus $900 that you had budgeted. And the same questions that you would ask on the marketing side apply to the travel as well. On office expenses, they were higher than budgeted. They came in at 500 versus the 300 that you were expecting. And so you might ask the question here, well, what was the difference? Like, why are we spending $200 more than we expected? Was this just a one-off thing like some of the other expenses that we've had? And do we need to do anything about it? And then other came in at 500 versus 360, and the same sort of questions apply. So what does that mean? When you add up all of those expenses, you get to total expenses of 18,000. And if you take that 18,000 from the 29,000 of gross profit, you get profit before tax of 11,000. And so there's a bit of a concern here, right? So not only are we're over on revenue, we're quite a lot over on cost of goods sold, which means we're under pretty significantly on gross profit. We're also over on total expenses as well. Not by much, not too concerning, but enough that you should be really asking some of those questions we said. And what does that lead to? Well, even with the higher revenue, you kind of get a bit of a double whammy from cost of goods sold being higher and the total expenses being higher. So your actual profit before tax is 11,000 versus 15,690 that you had budgeted. And I think, if you look at this every quarter, and some businesses look at this sort of stuff every month. It depends on what type of business you are. Like, some businesses are more lumpy than others, and therefore looking at this on a monthly basis might not make sense. But I do encourage all business owners to look at this simple sort of analysis on a monthly or quarterly basis, and don't just look at it and say, okay, great, we'll look at it next month or we'll look at it next quarter. But actually ask some of those questions, because really what this should be doing, like any other financial analysis, is driving your decision making. Do we need to put our prices up? Do we need to cut our costs somewhere to save money because we're not making as much elsewhere? Do we, if cost of goods sold are significantly higher and that's what's driving a lot of the problem, do we need to go find new suppliers? And do that research around, can we get flour cheaper, and can we get some of those raw ingredients cheaper than what we've been paying? But without looking at it on a regular basis and without asking some of those questions, you're really in the dark and can't make actionable decisions that really drive your business forward. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. We're going to have many more topics coming up in the coming weeks, and encourage you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We'd love to continue to provide value for everyone. Thanks again. See you next time.